Hello, I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50. Welcome to this new podcast in which we celebrate and learn from the insights and experiences of the amazing people we've featured in our Leaders 50 listing of the world's most inspiring organizational leaders. I'm delighted that alongside me, I have Sanyin Zhang. Sanyin is a CEO coach, advisor to corporations such as Novartis, T-Mobile, the US Congressional Award, and Privateer Space. She's a professor at Duke University's Pratt School of Engineering and leads the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at its Fuqua School of Business. Most importantly, of course, Sanyin is a Thinkers 50 award winner and one of the world's 50 most important management thinkers. Sanyin, great to see you.
Thanks so much, Stuart. And let me just take a moment to brag about my co-host before I brag about our guest today. So my co-host, Stuart Craner, is the co-founder of Thinkers 50, which is the world's premier global ranking of management thinkers, or as the Financial Times had called it, the Academy Awards of Management. He is a prolific author of management books, and because of his range of expertise in leadership ideas and his curatorial genius, not to mention his British sense of humor, he is always one of my favorite thought partners. And now to our guest today, Tarang Amin. All right, so I've had the joy of knowing Tarang for, gosh, a little bit more than a decade now, Tarang, or close to a decade. He is the chairman and CEO of e.l.f. Beauty, a job that he has held since 2014. He took the company public in 2016 in one of the most successful IPOs in beauty. And then since then, he has grown the business over 5x, strategically expanded it into a multi-brand portfolio that now includes e.l.f. Cosmetics, Skin, Well People, Key Soul Care, Naturium, Road, and has set records on new digital platforms. And e.l.f. Beauty also the first company in the beauty sector with the Fair Trade Certified Manufacturing certification and operates entirely on renewable energy at its managed sites. Tarang's commitment to building teams that mirror the consumers they serve is reflected not only in e.l.f. Beauty's employee base, but also in its board of directors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in later on in the podcast. So e.l.f. Beauty is only one in of four public companies out of nearly 4,200 in the US with a board of directors that has at least two-thirds women and at least one-third minority representation. And then previously in Tarang's 30 plus years in consumer products, he has served as president, CEO, and director of Shift Nutrition, where it grew an enterprise value from 190 million to 1.5 billion. You're getting a pattern here, right? With leading brands such as Airborne and Mega Red. And then he also began his career at Procter & Gamble and is a proud double Dookie with both a bachelor's and MBA from Duke University. So I'm going to hand it over to Stuart to kick us off with the first question.
Tarang, I mean, congratulations. Actually, there's not many CEOs we talk to who have actually held the job for more than 10 years. That's pretty amazing in itself. And one of the themes that comes through from your amazing work with e.l.f. is that you're passionate about democratizing access to equity. Can you start by kind of talking about that? Why you do that? Why it's important, and how you go about it?
Sure. So, well, thanks again for having me. I'm a big believer in making sure your teams reflect the communities you serve. And so I'm very proud of the fact that our workforce is 76% women, 74% Gen Z and millennial, 44% diverse. They absolutely represent the community we serve. I'm also a big believer in ownership makes a difference. Growing up, our family had a motel business. I saw firsthand the power of ownership. Yet I found myself in many corporate environments, as great as the companies were, where the vast majority of equity disproportionately went to the people on top. So when I had my first CEO role at Shift Nutrition, I insisted that everyone get equity. It was the only battle I had with my private equity backers. They said, no, you don't understand. There's a management pool. It only goes to the people at the top. I said, great, make mine performance-based and let's distribute my equity to all the employees. And I saw the power that created. e.l.f. Beauty is one of the very few companies that grants equity to every single employee every year all around the world. And I'm actually quite explicit about I want to have meaningful wealth creation for the people that are driving our results. And so if you exclude the named executive officers, since our IPO, I think we've granted over $220 million of equity in a stock that's gone up sixfold. So it's something that absolutely ties a lot to our culture in terms of having this passionate team of owners in a high performance team culture. And we've seen the difference it's made.
Wow. So, Tarang, so often we think about power as those who have power become more powerful when they empower others. And I think the democratization of equity and access to equity is such a big part of that. So, this is very superhero like behavior or very Leaders 50 leader type of behavior. And every superhero and Leaders 50 leader has an origin story. You shared a little bit about your parents owning a hotel. Can you tell us a little bit more about your origin story, starting from, I think, Uganda? And then also, when do you first think of yourself as a leader?
Well, my origin story is one of an immigrant. I'm of Indian ethnicity. Both my parents were born and raised in India. As you said, I was born in East Africa. I was born in Nairobi, Kenya. I spent part of my childhood in Kenya and Uganda. And our family immigrated to the US when I was a child. Now, like many immigrants, the way we rose was as entrepreneurs. So when I was 14 years old, we sold our house, we took every penny we had, and we bought our first motel on Route 1 in Alexandria, Virginia. We moved right into the manager's apartment, and our business models of families would find these distressed properties. We'd fix them up. We're good operators, and we kept building that out. Now, the motel experience was quite formative for me because I found myself after graduate school at Procter & Gamble in their brand management program. And as great a training ground as that was, I tell people everything I know about cash flow, economic profit, how you treat people really came from those early days building up our family business with my dad, and then being able to take those same entrepreneurial skills to be able to scale much larger businesses. Now, I think you had a second question of
When do you then first start thinking of yourself as a leader? Because most people don't say, "Oh, I'm a," they don't come upon leadership. There's actually a moment when they said, "Oh, I'm leading." When did that whole moment happen?
Well, I'd point back to the motels and just to give a little bit more context or color on that. I was 14 years old. I was 1979. Interest rates in the US were around 18%, and every penny we had was leveraged into this property. So you develop this intuitive sense of cash flow, every dollar coming out, every dollar going out. I've always loved that Billie Jean King quote of pressure is a privilege. And I hadn't seen the quote until many years after I was on the motels, but I love this aspect of feeling pressure indicates you're in a situation with high stakes and the potential for great achievement. And I very much felt that way in the motels. And it really was formative from a leadership standpoint because not only had the pressure of we need these to work, our entire family well-being is based on it, but how do you motivate others, many of whom were hourly workers, to be able to give discretionary effort, to be able to meet what we wanted to go do? So I'd say that was my first time I really felt a leader. I mean, I subsequently was like president of my high school class, did other leadership roles when I was at Duke and other things. But I really go back to those early pressure points where you had two alternatives. You could either fail, or if you were going to succeed, you're going to succeed through others. And that very much, I think, has stayed with me for, over 30 years.
Were you ever tempted to go back into the motel or hotel business, Tarang?
No, I think it was an incredible experience, but my parents had a high premium on education and making sure I did something different than the motels. As much as I still love hospitality, I'm still probably one of the best tippers there is because I know how hard it is to make up rooms and do hospitality work. But I'd say my interest probably took me elsewhere.
But I suppose that gets down to a basic question, which the motel experience must have emphasized is how do you balance strong business fundamentals, kind of nitty gritty, attention to the cash flow, with inspiring people to achieve more than they thought possible? It's kind of yin and yang of business, isn't it?
Well, I think the unifier for me is finding a way of leveraging strengths. So I've always had the ability of leveraging strengths in people as well as in businesses and really being able to really hone in on that. And that I found was a great unifier. If you can actually paint people a picture of this is what we're trying to achieve. And then more importantly, all to help them reveal what their personal strengths are. And I've always believed in the power of diverse teams. And if you have a diverse team, if everyone's leveraging their strengths, the entire team gets stronger.
Tarang, that's actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is on superpowers. I know at e.l.f, superpowers is such a powerful word. It's about leveraging people's strengths, their superpowers, and it's also a great part of my work and leadership. So, what's one of the most important lessons you've discovered in about leveraging people's superpowers in order to manage their potential? Um, because we're in a society that focuses on deficiencies rather than proficiencies. But you at e.l.f, you've managed to leverage and find that superpowers fit. So, what are some of the lessons that you can share with us?
Well, I think one of the first lessons is when superpowers are absent. I remember I was brought in to do a turnaround at Clorox, and as part of my getting to know each person, I met this woman, and she was in customer marketing and absolutely miserable. And I said, "Why are you in this role?" And the assessment was, well, because they don't think I'm very good with retailers, so they put me in this. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like that doesn't make any sense. And she ended up being a terrific consumer marketer. So I changed her role. I put her in a consumer role where she could shine. And so I get back to this theme of leveraging strengths, being able to uncover what someone's really good at and really being able to hone that. I'd say the second thing for at least my personal superpowers is being able to create the cultural conditions for innovation to thrive. What are those barriers that get into people's way that you can basically free an organization to be able to really achieve well beyond what they thought they were able to?
How do you describe the e.l.f culture, Tarang? And at what stage did you figure out what you were trying to create with the e.l.f culture as well?
Well, that was well honed based on some of my other leadership experiences. So the way I describe the e.l.f culture is we're a passionate team of owners who operate in a high performance team culture. And there's a few concepts that are really important from the beginning. That ownership, making sure the community represented the community we serve, but also not being assumptive that people know what the norms and behaviors are that we expect and that we thrive. So we actually train everyone in the company on this high performance team model where it's about developing passionate relationships and then being able to give pinpointed specific feedback real time in the spirit of helping the team succeed. We call that healthy conflict, which then in turn leads to very strong mutual accountability. And if you look at any objective measure, we just got back our Culture Amp survey. 97% of our employees participated. 98% would recommend e.l.f as a place to work. The level of engagement, particularly on the high performance, is a key tenet of our culture of we're one team, one dream. We rise and fall together, and making sure that shared belief system of this is what we're trying to do, this is what we believe in. And I put it all the way back to probably two things. Our mission as a company is making the best of beauty accessible to every eye, lip, and face, and every is very important. So that ability, that aspect of inclusivity, making sure each person is leveraging their strength and is free, is really important. And that ties to our vision of being a different kind of beauty company. We do that by building brands that disrupt norms, shape culture, and connect communities through positivity, inclusivity, and accessibility. And so the culture is absolutely essential to our ability to be able to meet that vision and mission.
Healthy conflict is a difficult thing to manage day to day, isn't it?
It is, but that's why we're not assumptive. We actually train. We have a high performance team coach on retainers available to anyone in the company. Even as a senior team, many people on my senior team I've worked with for 15 years, we still will do the ritual of pinpointing two specific behaviors we admire about each other, one specific behavior that might be limiting their effectiveness. Everyone goes around, gives a feedback, and we make commitments to each other of let's accentuate the things that we really admire and let's minimize the things that might be getting in the way. And so being able to practice that pinpointed behavior where it becomes natural in an organization, we do it with every one of our teams. And it's a base expectation of how we do work, which is different than a lot of organizations. I found particularly a lot of big organizations, feedback often wasn't given until the annual performance review. And so we actually don't do performance reviews because I didn't want the crutch of an excuse of why you weren't giving feedback throughout the year as you went through. We do development plans, but it really is a culture that thrives on feedback and on getting better.
There's an insight that I'm gleaning from this conversation, which is this idea of making explicit what most people have considered implicit, right? Because the implicit from one person to another may actually not be in a lot of alignment. So making explicit, like calling out each other's superpowers, which I know your CMO and CFO have often done on their team, and you have too. Or this idea of, you said, don't assume that everyone knows what the norms are. So you actually have to codify, not only codify those, but also put those out in practice and call them out when the behaviors are in alignment. And I think that's part of e.l.f.'s secret sauce. But I want to go back to something a word you use a lot, which is the word rituals. In business world, people would say, oh, what's the practice or what's the organizational behavior? But you intentionally use the word rituals. Why?
Well, rituals is something that I've long believed in. I have my own personal rituals of working out in the morning, how I lead the company in terms of our executive team, and beyond the agenda topics, the most valuable time of our enterprise-wide meeting is the first hour and a half, which we call "What's Hot." What's hot in your life? What's hot in the business? That's where we'll agree, disagree, commit, and keep moving. And so, what I found is by using these rituals, it actually frees up a lot of time to be able to directly connect with each of our leaders one on one, and being able to really understand what's important to them, what do they value, what motivates them, but more importantly, what are the barriers that we have to remove from an organizational standpoint. And so the rituals end up becoming a really important practice of really making sure that we're being disciplined and organized in terms of the things we need to do, so we actually have that time to think, to lead, to connect.
It's reflective, and rituals are meaningful. You know,
But it's that interesting combination, isn't it? I think Tom Peters' book and Robert Waterman's book, In Search of Excellence, talked about organisations with simultaneous loose, tight properties, and I think there's something of that with you, with the freedom and yet the discipline.
No, that's right. That's right. I remember many years ago seeing Professor Samantha Ghoshal's talk at the World Economic Forum, where you talk about the smell of the place, and he contrasted spending the summers with his kids in Calcutta and the stifling heat and the smells and everything else, and contrasting that with he was on faculty at a university near the forest of Fontainebleau, and he described organizationally the many organizations put in a set of controls, compliance, contracts that really end up making an organization feel like Calcutta in the summer, versus those who actually unleash their people through stretch and ability to unleash their powers, and support and trust. And that stayed with me, which was probably like 3 decades ago when I saw that. And it really is, what is the smell of the place that you're trying to create? And what are the conditions around it? It's interesting. We're doing some strategy work right now, and working with Roger Martin, who I'd done strategy work with over the years, over the decades, on different businesses. And as we went through our business and we contrasted with one of the leading global beauty players, he went through their list and he's like, oh, that they look like, it's like a PNG of beauty. I'm like, yes, they are. And as he went through the set of conditions they have, and these are through their public documents, he's like, they kind of want to control everything. And the way he deemed our culture as he went through, he's like, oh, you actually don't want to control that much. In fact, I would view your organization as minimal viable control, similar to a minimal viable product. He goes, your approach on innovation is you listen to your community. What do they want? What's the best products in prestige? You put your twist on, introduce it incredible value, versus this other company wanted to actually invent the molecules and decide what consumers ended up getting. Same in our marketing approach. They wanted a very strict brand strategy. This is what one will comply to. Whereas ours, half the time I'm seeing the things that we do at the same time consumers are. I'll be texting my CMO, did we just drop some guy in the middle of the Pacific Ocean care package? And she's like, oh yeah, our team, someone on our integrated marketing team saw this guy, was fed up with his job, quit his job, and sailing around the world with his cat. We thought it'd be a great idea. And my point was, it's not even branded. She's like, that's not the point. It comes from the team. The word will get out. Certainly the word got out. And so I think this concept, going back to culture, of what is it you're really trying to control, and what are the conditions you want people to be empowered to thrive and have those ideas. Like, nobody had to go seek approval from anyone to drop this care package, but it's one of those things that's actually made us the number one brand amongst Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and millennials. Is, first of all, we have a team that reflects that community, but more importantly, we create an environment and a set of conditions where they have the freedom to be able to take those insights and put them into action.
Of course, Roger Martin's well known for his book Playing to Win. He wrote with A.G. Lafley from Procter and Gamble, and it's an amazing number of people we've talked to over the years whose early experiences were with P&G. And I wonder how much your early experiences with P&G have shaped your own thoughts about culture and how e.l.f. behaves now.
Yeah, no, they absolutely have. I was at P&G 11 years. Again, it was another formative experience for me. I definitely learned the passion of how do you delight your consumers, the discipline about understanding how do you take insights into action, leadership. The leadership model at P&G very much has been with me, and I'd say those connections. I still have. I left P&G more than 20, 25 years ago. Yet, as soon as I connect with other leaders there or former, it's an instant connection. And so, and I would say that set of values that you picked up is definitely very much with me today.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is I think there's an economic cost to control, right? We think about control as power, but there's an economic cost to it because then people felt bound or stifled, as you had shared. And this idea of stifle and this idea of like empowering them while remaining disciplined in the fundamentals is that beautiful tension that enables innovation and true success. And areas where we saw that beautiful balance is in the, I would call it very cheeky campaign, changing the board game. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what sparked it? Because I think it's, whenever I share that, people always go, wow, this is something I want to share more of.
Yeah, well, as you know, as you said, we're big believers of your team reflecting the community you serve, but we don't want to just stop with our employees. We also believe there's power in diversity on a board, and so as you mentioned, we're one of only a few companies out of over 4,000 in the U.S. that have a board that's 2/3 women, 1/3 diverse. But the fact is, we don't want to be the only few companies that have that, and we're big believers business has a role for societal good. So we created this campaign as part of an initiative. We partnered with Billie Jean King on serving up basic facts of just how homogenous most U.S. public company boards are. We then took it to a pretty provocative campaign called So Many Dicks, So Few of Everyone Else. And the basic insight were there are more men named Richard, Rick, or Dick on America's corporate boards, and the entire population is underrepresented people. I mean, more than Hispanic women, almost as many as Black women, you name it. And by the way, our point is there's nothing wrong with being a Richard, Rick, or Dick. Let's just make room for some of these others. And so it was a way of breaking through. We partnered with NACD, sponsoring now 40 people through their Accelerate program, 40 women and minorities to be able to qualify them for board service. So we're using our platform, things that we believe in, to encourage other companies. Because I always tell other CEOs when they ask me, I said, I wish I could tell you it was hard to have a board that's 2/3 women and 1/3 diverse. But it wasn't. It took intentionality and just putting that intention to action. And so, to the extent we can shine a light and actually partner with other companies that also believe that, we feel we can help increase the rate of women and minorities in America's corporate boards.
Yeah, and it was effective also because of the timing, right? It also came during a time when I see e.l.f. just on that trajectory of tremendous growth, and then everyone was watching. And then you're able to say, this is why we were able to be successful and point to the data. So the timing and the context was also beautifully played to Tarang.
Yeah, no, and the context obviously is important. I think we're at a time, just given the polarization in the country, and many of these things kind of under attack right now. And we always take a lens of, I think we look at three things on what are we taking a stance on. First, does it tie to our ethos, our vision, mission, and values? Second, do we have any authority to talk on the subject? And third, what would our community think? So certainly on this board initiative, it absolutely ties to making the best of beauty accessible for every eye, lip, and face, and our views on inclusivity. In terms of our authority, yes, we're one of the few companies that actually have those stats, but we also have, I think our stock has appreciated 500% over the last 5 years. So we absolutely have authority of being able to do the proof points of how these connect. And then in terms of community, one of my board members said, okay, this is good. We understand your stance. How does your community think? I'm like, that's a great point. Let's run it across all of our social channels. We got 98% extreme positive sentiment. Many of our consumers are like, this is why by e.l.f. e.l.f. stands for everyone. e.l.f. cares about them. Yeah, we had the 2% that were like, hey, there's nothing wrong with being a Richard, Rick, or Dick or a man on a board, but the vast majority absolutely approve of the stances we take. And that's one of the lenses we use to kind of say, as we talk about being purpose-led and results-driven, how you make that connection, these two going hand in hand.
Yeah, it was a fantastic campaign. How do you keep the momentum and the energy behind it, Tarang? I mean, one thing that strikes me, you've been as I said earlier, you've been in the job for a while, and it's a really kind of young and youthful feeling organisation, and the way you communicate and the things you do. How do you keep it fresh, and how do you personally stay fresh, open to feedback, and open to learning? Because we all know as we get older, we like our brilliance to be confirmed rather than questioned. Generally, that's human nature.
Well, I think that's one of the great advantages I have of leading a company that's full of young, diverse employees. I'm constantly learning. Particularly, I'd say my social game is woefully inadequate relative to most of our employees, and so I've always taken the stance that the longer I'm in business, the more curious I get, the more questions I ask, the more I want to learn and be open to, and have those forums. And so that's something that personally motivates me, but it motivates our entire company and organization. One of the things I do, I actually started it when, to your learning question, when the pandemic started, we knew it was going to be important to communicate more. So I started doing a weekly email. We had made commitments early in the pandemic when many of our competitors were laying off people, stopping product innovation, stopping their marketing, because we knew it was not going to be good for the beauty category if people aren't going out. We made a commitment. We're not going to lay anyone off. It's one team, one dream. We're going to get through this together. And so I started writing a weekly email just to make sure that communication flow was great. I think the first one was kids, pets, and videos. First time being on Zoom, like it's okay. We're all dealing with a new reality. If your kid comes in a frame, just introduce your pet. I think the second one, because we did make that commitment of not laying anyone off, was cash is king. And then it kept going. And at the beginning, they started very business oriented. And over time, I always have things, personal reflections, things on my family, what was on my mind. This week, I think will mark the 284th consecutive weekly email. And I never thought I'd be writing them this long. But the reason why I do is every week I'll get dozens of responses. It's not always the same people. It's always somebody different depending on what topic connected with someone. And it's been a great forum for me to directly connect with employees I otherwise wouldn't, perhaps a little bit later in their career. And I learn with every time, even though I'm maybe imparting some thoughts, I actually learn a lot about the team, about individuals, about some of these themes and people's different takes on them. And so I'd say creating those, again, using the word design, those rituals that are all about learning and setting context and being able to interact is key to our culture. Since even our town halls every 2 weeks, when we do them, we're celebrating, we're introducing new people, we're celebrating, but we're also highly transparent. I think that's an important part of this culture is transparency of, hey, let me tell you what we didn't get exactly right. Let me tell you where I personally went wrong, and here's what we're doing about it. It's really important from a standpoint of not being in an ivory tower, not being inaccessible, but that accessibility and that ability of like anyone can reach out to me anytime and it's welcome.
Yeah, I think that's actually another secret sauce of e.l.f. that I've seen, right? So, Stuart, for Tarang's 60th birthday, the team actually bound all those emails into a book called Best Tarang. And I think that book, I hope to see it in print beyond just the those who are in the e.l.f. circle, because I think it's a master class in executive communications. But I also wanted to highlight that I remember attending a e.l.f. gathering, It was a celebration of all the e.l.f. employees and partners. And I remember being seated at the same table as you for dinner. And as I looked around that table, imagine a table with the CEO would have like all the executives and board members, but it had suppliers, it had entry level, and it just reinforced this idea that good ideas can come from anyone in the organization, and everyone there felt like they mattered. So now my question to you is, you're on an international expansion. I mean, I go into Germany, I go into Italy, I go into Copenhagen, and there's e.l.f. Different cultures, and also India. And you've long been, in terms of your supply chain, with China and quality control. How do you take what is good about this culture and pervade it over all the different locales, empowering the different locales also to be true to the best elements of their culture?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's not being assumptive. We start with our ethos. This is our mission, vision, values. We train high performance teamwork everywhere around the world. We have this theme that we developed when we did our China transformation a number of years ago of one team, one dream. Every single e.l.f. member is an equal card carrying member of the e.l.f. team. And so we make sure that those same core norms and values are the same. And, the other thing I would say is, as different as cultures are, I've over my career found greater commonality than differences in people and core cultural behaviors. In fact, we see it in our business. I remember, as you mentioned, only about 20% of our business outside the U.S. We're starting to expand the business internationally. And I remember in Douglas, Italy. It's a prestige retailer in Italy. We said, look, we don't have one Italian consumer. We don't know this market. How much should we customize this brand for the Italian consumer? They said, oh, not much. Italians like hot American brands. Sure enough, the day we launched, there were lines all the way down the block. And e.l.f. quickly became their number one brand. In fact, the e.l.f. gondola is right next to Chanel, and it looks like it belongs there. In fact, the only argument we had with Douglas is they said, I know we have 20 segments in the US where we have the number one or two position. I go, and I know you're particularly strong in this category called primers, which is the first thing someone will put on. It helps the rest of the makeup adheses, smooths out their pores, etc. Primers isn't a category in Italy. And our approach is, look, we're a digitally native brand. We're inherently test and learn. Power Grip Primer is actually the number one SKU in all of mass and prestige color cosmetics in the US. Why don't we put it in? If it doesn't work, we have plenty of other things we can sub it up. And not only are we the number one brand in Douglas, Italy, but Power Grip Primer is their number one item. So apparently the Italians did need primer and they didn't know it. The point of this story being, we've seen the same play out country after country that we've expanded. The main franchises in the US are the same franchises in those countries. One of the reasons why we start with such high rankings in these countries is there's pent-up consumer demand for the brand because of our strength in social in the US. Didn't need primers. The consumers we appealed to absolutely did because they saw that feed. And so I would say, for me, as much as people sometimes focus on the cultural differences, we focus on the cultural commonalities, and particularly in our value system of, I've never met someone who didn't want to succeed. I've never met someone, particularly in e.l.f., given our values structure, who want to do the right thing, who didn't want to be empowered, who didn't want to actually have that seamless connection with their colleagues in different locations. And so we similar to the US, we stay focused on that. And then because we're hiring in these different countries, you naturally get that. Our India team is very different than our China team, which is different than our team in London. But you see more commonality in terms of the core values of the company and how we work.
In what sense, Tarang, has your own global background helped you in delivering that message and developing the company globally?
Well, it certainly helped. I mean, I think being of Indian ethnicity, one of my passions, my wife and I, we love to travel. We love to explore different cultures in different countries. Having been in global organizations, I was part of the team at P&G that took Pantene from a $50 million US Western European brand to a $2 billion market leader globally. So certainly having a long career, both personally as well as professionally, being able to have empathy and understanding and most importantly, curiosity. What drives and when we do our engagement survey, it's done globally, all around the world, and we look for what are those areas of strength, what are the areas down to an individual work group level that we need to reinforce.
So we now come to the portion of our interview that is the short answer portion. So these are 2 to 3 sentence answers. And so the first one I know is, what would others say is a superpower of yours? You had shared what you would say is a superpower of yours, but what would others, if I were to interview others around, what would they say?
I would say it would stem off that Maya Angelou quote of, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way you made them feel. And so I'd say that superpower of being able to put myself in other people's shoes, and that being genuine and sincere is, I think, one of the things people would say about me.
We talked a bit about your early career, Tarang. Who are your key mentors in the early stages of your career, well, and the later stages as well? I mean, you mentioned Samantha Ghoshal, you mentioned Roger Martin. Practitioners and thinkers, who are your mentors?
No, those definitely are, took away a lot from both of them. I would say, others, early in my career, I started in brand management. One of my earliest mentors was Franco Spadini, who ran R&D for beauty globally. And he just was a different field, but I learned so much from him. He learned stuff from me in terms of what was going on from a business standpoint. I mentioned the CEO, A.G. Lafley, was a key mentor for me throughout my career at P&G and then well beyond. Coach K, I'm a double dookie, so I think just how much I've learned from watching Coach and his approach to teams and leadership. I'd call a few of those out.
If you could give your younger self, one piece of leadership advice, what would it be?
I would say the importance of genuine connection, right? I think early in your career, you're always focused on either achieving or building necessary skills, et cetera. And I think as time has gone on, one of the things that's the curiosity I have most is about other people and what motivates them, what makes them tick. And so I would give myself that advice of that permission of it's okay to actually spend more time with people, just getting to know them, understanding them, and the power that creates.
Outside of work, Tarang, what inspires you or enables you to recharge?
Well, we love the outdoors, and we happen to be in a beautiful area, the San Francisco Bay Area. So my wife and I love hiking, being outdoors. We love conservation, love seeing wildlife, and those moments in nature definitely are a massive area of recharge for us.
One thing I always see you do is also you hold the sense of wonder, right? You never lost your sense of wonder, and that's beautiful. So now we come to the lightning round of our conversation. And so for this portion, we'll ask you a series of rapid fire questions, or actually, there's no we in that. Stuart is masterful at this, so Stuart will take the lead.
Given your Indian background, I've got to go with the first one: cricket or baseball, Tarang?
Neither.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
One app you can't live without?
My Google app.
Favorite place you've traveled to?
Africa.
And if you weren't a CEO, you'd be running a motel?
If I wasn't a CEO, I'd be traveling the world, which I kind of do anyway. So I get to do both, and so I'll keep that.
Well, you could be on that yacht. What's your go-to comfort food?
Pizza. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Favorite sports team?
Duke basketball, of course. Yeah. And I couldn't have any other answer as Sanyan being on this.
Yeah, yes. Even I have to say that. And what's something you're surprisingly good at, or surprisingly bad at?
I'm actually surprisingly good at grilling, surprisingly bad at dancing.
He laughs because I remember for your son's wedding, you had to learn the dance moves, and I heard the feedback was you were pretty darn good. So
man, that was the most stressful thing I've done in a long time. I feel like people are like, "Are you giving the speech?" I'm like, "No, I talk all the time. That's not a big deal." But having to practice with my wife those dance moves and one of those Indian choreographed Bollywood songs, I think that was my biggest source of stress the couple of months leading up to both weddings.
I'm with you on that, Tarang. Takeaways, Sanyin.
Well, I think one of the key ones is the importance of rituals, because rituals are imbued with meaning. And if we have rituals in our organization, it's not, people are not moved by information, they're moved by emotion. People are not, don't derive meaning from data, they derive meaning from stories, and they don't practice things for the sake of practicing them. They practice things because they have a better chance of practicing them if they're rituals. So to think about in leadership, what are the organizational rituals that will enable a leader to really get to know each of their people and facilitate that type of feedback back and forth. I think that's my key takeaway from this conversation. You, Stuart?
I remember Jack Welch used to write personal letters all the time, didn't he? Just kind of handwritten notes to people. And you think how powerful communication is.
Mm.
Honest, transparent communication across the organization, no matter who you are and what you're doing. So I think that's a really, really powerful message from Tarang. And I think the thing about ownership makes a difference. Of course it does. Of course it does. But we all understand that from our own experiences. But organizations don't practice it. And I think it's incredibly important. And I think Tarang's immigrant story is, you think there's a great book called Pioneers by Neri Kara-Silliman, which profiles people who have been refugees or immigrants, and that are often very successful CEOs because not only do they have that hunger, but often they have that background, like Tarang shared about his parents and the motel business, and an awareness of kind of the fundamentals of business. You don't take your eye off the cash flow, and you look after customers. They're really powerful stories. So I'm taking those things away. How about you, Tarang? What nerves have we struck, and what stories have we resurrected? I love the story about Samantha Ghoshal, because Samantha was a great man, and I heard him say the similar story about the smell of the place. I've always thought that was really powerful because he's true.
It is, and so I think maybe a couple of the biggest ones for me is this curiosity, the insatiable ability of continuing to learn, no matter what you've done or where it is. There's always something to learn, and then the culture. Like, many times people talk about our successful business strategy, and I always have to back them up. That the number one thing is a passionate team of owners and a high performance team culture. And I don't feel people spend enough time on the cultural conditions necessary for you to achieve their goals.
And it's also it's worth stressing what we talked about: rituals for communication and the kind of processes. It takes a lot of energy and commitment, and continuing energy and continuing commitment to make these things work.
But it also gives a lot of energy. So I'm also a big personal handwritten note person. I mean, in fact, every year, every single employee, I'll write at least 2 or 3 times. Time we give out bonuses, times we give out equity throughout the year on promotions and other things. And it actually gives a lot of energy back because it's those personal connections and that level of engagement that really drives everything that we do.
Yeah. I would also like to just add, from just knowing you and knowing the e.l.f. team, that these things that you do, for example, your early morning tries, and you call up employees and just say, hey, how are you doing? There's no agenda, just to get to know them, or the what's hot. Like, anyone can put anything on the table, or even your product review company-wide calls to be able to get that sort of information. I've always wondered how, whenever someone reaches out to you for time, you always find time on your schedule. And I think that's because you were creating the time for getting all those bits of data and feedback about the pulse, so that you can always stay 2 or 3 steps ahead of where the trends are going, or what might be problematic obstacles coming up ahead. I've seen that being done also to effect by several military leaders, that battle rhythm. And I think that's also, for you, a secret to your success, is that those rituals for yourself, connecting with the employees, actually create that that pulse in the organization.
Thank you very much. As always, Sanyin, thank you to you as well.